meeting, eager to see his daughter, but when the kitchen door swung open, he froze. What happened next would force the millionaire to pay a heavy price for the true meaning of family. The Carter mansion glowed in the night like a giant jewel set in the quiet neighborhood. Light spilled through the tall glass windows, illuminating every detail. A kitchen draped in deep green, a wide polished island, silverware gleaming as if freshly shined. Richard Carter pushed the door gently and stepped inside. In his hand was a brand new teddy bear, a gift he had picked up on the way home. In his mind, he pictured bright smiles and the sound of children's laughter. But the moment he entered the kitchen fully, his steps faltered. In front of him stood Lily, his 6-year-old daughter, tiny and barefoot. She clutched a broom taller than her own body, her back bent slightly as she tried to sweep the floor. Richard froze for a moment. This sprawling mansion had always had staff to clean, and yet tonight, Lily, a child of only 5, was hunched over sweeping the floor. The sight cut him to the core, his little girl carrying a burden that never should have been hers. Her shoulders shook with each sob, her cheeks still wet with tears. Around her thin wrist, a frayed pink ribbon hung loosely. Right beside her, Vanessa, Richard's second wife, stood near the kitchen island. One hand held a half-eaten banana, the other flicked a thin wooden ruler. At first glance, it might have looked decorative, but under the light, Richard could see clearly. It could turn into a tool of intimidation at any moment. Richard tightened his grip on the teddy bear, his voice dropping low. "What are you doing, Lily?" Vanessa flinched at his voice, but quickly regained her composure. She flashed a gentle smile, circling halfway around the counter. "I just asked her to sweep away a little cobweb to welcome you home. She loves helping out. Doesn't she look adorable?" At those words, Lily's wide, frightened eyes darted quickly toward Vanessa, as if searching for a signal, before she dared to look back at her father. She dropped her gaze, hiding her reddened feet behind the edge of the cabinet. Her voice was barely a whisper. I was just helping Mommy a little." Richard stepped forward, bending down to lift his daughter. He felt her small body trembling, the broom slipping from her hands. But Vanessa quickly slid in, pulling out a chair toward the dining table, her voice syrupy. "Let me finish cleaning. You two should sit and talk. I'm sure you've missed her so much." Richard paused, but his eyes never left his daughter's little hands. The tiny fingers were marked with red cracks, made even more noticeable by the worn pink ribbon. They weren't fresh wounds, but clearly they had gone untended for many days. Vanessa followed his gaze, then quickly turned away, the smile on her lips tightening for a moment. She grabbed the dishcloth on the counter, wiping with sharp, deliberate motions as if she wanted to erase every trace. Without another word, Richard sat down and placed the new teddy bear into his daughter's hands. The bear was soft, its bright red bow standing out against the snowy white fur. Lily hugged it to her chest, her eyes lighting up for a brief instant. She pressed her cheek against the plush fur, only to freeze when she noticed Vanessa standing behind her. Vanessa didn't have to say a word. Just a glance and a tilt of her head toward the broom leaning on the floor was enough. Lily forced a faint smile at her father, then slowly turned back toward the kitchen. Richard stayed where he was, his hand resting on the cold surface of the table. He knew something was wrong, but he didn't yet have proof to speak out. All he had were fragments, the old pink ribbon, the blistered little feet, the child's furtive glances. From the hallway doorway, Jacob, the family's elderly butler, stood pressed against the wall. He let out a quiet sigh, his eyes filled with helplessness. Then he turned away, as though he couldn't bear to watch any longer. In the brightly lit kitchen, the faint sound of a broom sweeping the floor rose again. Richard sat there in silence. He placed his hand on the empty gift box, feeling as if he had just brought home a moment of joy, only to watch someone crush it right before his eyes. Richard had no idea that just a few hours later, a small detail from that pink ribbon would make him, for the very first time, question everything inside this glowing house. The stifling air from the kitchen still lingered in Richard's chest. He walked slowly toward the dining room, caught between two impulses, half wanting to demand an answer outright, half telling himself he might just be overreacting. But the image of Lily barefoot, clutching a broom, with that frayed pink ribbon, kept replaying in his mind. The dining room appeared in its familiar order. A spotless white tablecloth, candles set in silver holders, their golden flames casting flickering shadows across the wall. On the table, a lavish dinner awaited, rosy red steak, rich cream soup, and red wine glistening in crystal glasses. The silverware was neatly arranged, but there were only two place settings, for Richard and Vanessa. There was no place set for Lily. Richard's eyes swept the room. He remembered just that afternoon, noticing the sink piled with wet dishes stacked clumsily, nothing like an adult's touch. A faint suspicion stirred. The girl sat quietly on a low stool against the wall, clutching the stuffed bear Richard had just given her. In front of her sat a bowl of cold rice, its lid resting on top. Lily's face was hidden beneath a curtain of messy hair. She stole a glance at her father, then quickly lowered her head again, as if afraid someone might catch her looking. Behind her, Jacob was adjusting the tablecloth with deliberate slowness. The old man's eyes carried a heavy weight, as though burdened with words he couldn't speak. Richard pulled out a chair and sat down at the table. His gaze circled the room before settling. His voice was calm, but there was an edge beneath it. "Why isn't there a meal for Lily?" Vanessa let out a soft laugh, setting her wineglass down. Her tone was sweet as honey. "I already fed her earlier. Children need to go to bed early to keep a proper routine. It's better for her health that way." The answer might have sounded reasonable, but in Richard's ears, it cut sharp and bitter. He turned to his daughter, his voice softening. "Come here. Sit next to Daddy." Lily's shoulders tightened. She rose, took a tiny step forward, then stopped. Her eyes flicked toward Vanessa, as though asking permission. Vanessa said nothing. She only arched an eyebrow and gave the faintest shake of her head. Lily immediately lowered her face, her bare toes curling together,